All right, I'm back on page 207 at the top. They're climbing up to the Capitol. As they climbed on, Violet looked back at the statue, suddenly struck with the idea that messing around in politics could be a deadly business. The liquor interests hadn't liked Mr. Carmack, and they didn't like suffragists either. In spite of the midday heat, Violet shivered. Inside the Capitol, the low, vaulted stone ceilings gave you the feeling you were underground. It was dark and felt cooler than outside. They climbed a wide stone staircase. Violet ran her hand over the cool stone handrail. There was a huge, jagged-looking gouge out of it. But when Violet touched it, she found that it too was smooth, as if hands had worn it down for many years. Chloe noticed Violet looking at it. "That's from a bullet," she said. "When the Tennessee legislature met after the Civil War, some of the legislators tried to escape because they didn't want to vote for Tennessee to rejoin the Union. But there were soldiers guarding them, and they opened fire." Violet stared at the gouge in the stair rail. "No wonder Father thinks politics isn't safe for women." Chloe laughed. "Well, I like to think once we're in, there'll be a little less gunplay involved. Anyway, you can see why the Tennessee legislators might still be a little persnickety about having Yankees in here telling them what to do." "Yes," said Violet. She followed Chloe up the stairs. The second story was lighter, with a high stone ceiling. The hallway was shaped like a cross. At one end was the House of Representatives, and at the other were the Senate and the library. It all seemed oddly quiet after all the fuss and noise in the Hermitage, and in the streets, and in the train station during the last week. "Thank goodness you're here, Miss Mayhew," Miss Pulitzer burst through a doorway. "We need to work on 2 of the SUF committee members. Quick, we've lost them." "I thought only Southern women were allowed to lobby with legislators here in the Capitol," Chloe said. "They're not in the Capitol. I mean, we've lost them," said Miss Pulitzer. "Blotz and Credwell. They've flown the coop. Do you know what they look like?" "I think so," said Chloe. "Then go, please, look for them. We've got search parties out. Mrs. Ann Dallas Dudley has gone to the Hermitage, and Miss Sue Shelton White is searching the moving picture shows and Skolowski's ice cream parlor. We have guards covering the train station, and I'm going down to check the interurban station on Broadway. But Credwell might have an automobile. We need someone to drive out the highway looking for them. Is the Hope Chest nearby?" Yikes. Myrtle and Mr. Martin were trying a variation on their diet of sardines, Uneeda biscuits, and peaches. Myrtle had gotten a can of tuna fish instead. Myrtle was setting the Uneeda biscuits neatly out on a napkin on Mrs. Reddy's oilcloth tabletop, and Mr. Martin was just slicing through the lid of the tuna fish can with his pocket knife when the door burst open. It hit the wall with a loud crack, and a board fell off it and clattered to the floor. 2 men pounced into the room. They both had guns out, pointed at Mr. Martin. Myrtle dove into a corner. "Don't move, Arpadfi," one of the men barked. Mr. Martin raised his hand over his head. "I'm not Arpadfi." "Of course you are. Who else would be able to pronounce it? Drop the knife, and that device you're holding in your game hand." Mr. Martin dropped the knife and the tuna fish on the floor. The knife stuck in the wooden floor. The can rolled lopsidedly, a smell of tuna fish rising from the oil dribbling out. The man peered at the can intently. "Not a bomb, just a can of tuna fish," one of them announced. "Cover him, Hank. I'm going to put the cuffs on him." The man who had spoken moved over behind Mr. Martin, grabbed his hands and jerked them down behind Mr. Martin's back. Myrtle winced in sympathy. It was what that evil brakeman had done to her on the freight train. "Don't try nothing funny," said Hank. "Nobody cares if we shoot dangerous alien radicals." "I'm not an alien," said Mr. Martin. "I'm a U.S. citizen. The word alien here means somebody who's not born in the U.S. "Uh-huh. And just when did you become a U.S. citizen, Arpadfi?" "My name is Theodore Martin, and I was born in the United States." "Let's drop the Martin bourgeois, okay? You're Sandor Arpadfi. You were born in some European hellhole or other." "Hungary," the other agent put in. "Hungary, then, around 1892, and you came to the United States in 1897. You lost 3 fingers in an industrial accident in 1898. and your left eye in a knife fight in 1916. The man who was holding Mr. Martin's arms, he had handcuffs hanging at his belt. Myrtle noticed, but he made no move to get them, traced the scar from Mr. Martin's eye downward with his finger. It must be a glass eye, Myrtle realized. Mr. Martin jerked his head away. "Resisting arrest," the agent commented, twisting Mr. Martin's arms more tightly behind his back. "It wasn't a knife fight," said Mr. Martin through clenched teeth. "The other man had a knife. I did not. I am a U.S. citizen." "Right. You became a citizen in 1913, said the agent. "In other words, after you'd already become a radical. A radical can't become a U.S. citizen. I think the courts will find that your citizenship oath is null and void." "That's insane," Mr. Martin protested. Drops of sweat stood out on his forehead. Having his arms twisted must have hurt a lot, but he was trying not to show it. That was being brave, Myrtle supposed, but she wished he would cry out in pain so that his captors would be satisfied and stop hurting him. "In your position, I wouldn't go calling the laws of the United States of America insane," the agent suggested. "I don't believe that is the law," Mr. Martin panted, "and if it is the law, then it is insane." "Did you hear that, Hank?" the agent asked. "Sure did, Christopher," said Hank. "Anything else you want to tell us about the laws of the United States, our Podfee?" Mr. Martin glared at both of them, and would have liked to say a lot of things, Myrtle could tell. "Only that I'm much a citizen of the U.S. as you are, and I know my rights." "You're a member of a radical organization and you don't have no rights," said Hank smugly. "I'm a member of a labor union," said Mr. Martin. "It's my—" He gasped in pain and Myrtle winced again. First Amendment right. "The International Workers of the World is a labor union, the way the Boston Tea Party was a tea party," Christopher said. "Quit arguing with us or we might notice you pulled a knife on us. You see how he had that knife out when we came in, Hank?" He kicked at the open pocket knife where it had fallen on the floor. Myrtle would have liked to grab it and put it away, but then they'd probably say she'd pulled it on them. "Sure did," said Hank. "You gonna come along quietly, our Podfee, or should we report you pulled a knife on us?" Mr. Martin looked deflated, the same way he had on the train when he'd argued with the conductor. Myrtle thought, "What choice do I have? I am coming along quietly." He looked at Myrtle as if he was about to say something. Myrtle shook her head and put a finger to her lips to silence him. It was better for both of them if Myrtle remained invisible. In spite of the fact that Mr. Martin was coming along quietly, agents seemed to find it necessary to do quite a bit of kicking and shoving to get him out the door. Myrtle turned away. She picked up the knife Mr. Martin, or our Podfee, or whatever his name was, had dropped, folded it, and stuck it in the pocket of her blue dress, next to her picture of Mama and Daddy. She went to the cot where she slept and grabbed her toothbrush. She was just heading out the door when she bumped into Mrs. Reddy coming in. "Got him, did they?" said Mrs. Reddy. "Thank the good Lord. Child, now that you're free of that horrible man, I'm taking you to Mrs. Frankie Pierce. She's a colored suffragist leader who's done wonders in finding institutions that will take in wayward colored girls, and I'm sure she'll find—" Mrs. Reddy was packing up Myrtle's bundle as she said all this, and Myrtle didn't wait around to hear the rest of it. She didn't know if Mrs. Reddy had turned in Mr. Martin. Lots of people could have done it. He'd been so careless about staying hidden. And she wasn't about to ask her. If Mrs. Reddy had done it, then she'd have to hate Mrs. Reddy, and she really didn't have time for that. She ran out the door. Yikes. So two kind of exciting moments coming to head. Mr. Martin getting finally caught, and two legislators having run away. So we'll pick up on Chapter 17 next week.